Good evening, folks. We're in transportation week 5, where we cover chapters 5 and 6 out at SC Pro. We're in preparation for the actual certification exam, and I'm going to send the roster of people in this class to SC Pro, and they will invite you with a code to come out and take the exam anywhere from after tonight. I'm going to send it up. So you got week 7, 6, 7, and 8, 3 weeks to take the exam. And I know we meet on Monday, so that last week of the 8 weeks, it'll still be open all the way out till Friday. If it becomes an issue where you're trying to uh, go out and review and be ready for it. So I do want you to be confident that you're going to do all right on it, because you've got one swing at it is free. But if it comes out that you need to retest, we need to work that out so I can get you a second attempt. And I think there's a $25 charge or something like that for a second attempt. But for the most part, my students get through this the first time. So for those of you that have went out and followed the syllabus, and you have your assignments done for week 5 already, you already seen what's going on in block 5 and block 6. So we want to try to add something to the discussion that maybe you took from it, maybe give some personal experiences in these different areas to add some flavor to it that you didn't have when you were doing this by yourself. So our learning objectives, we're going to talk about the electronic data interchange, transportation management systems, the software, the TMS software, the automatic identification data capture, which is barcodes and RFID. They either are printed or they could be site or anywhere. And of course, GPS, which was invented by the military along with the internet, to better identify where the good guys and the bad guys were, so we didn't shoot the wrong people when we're out there with cannons and tanks and aircraft. And then we got collision avoidance systems. My first car that I've ever owned that has that in it, and it's it's a learning curve. I don't know what my driving style is, but 2 or 3 times during a trip, when I'm driving to Plainfield or whatever to teach, it'll say this vehicle requires a driver. So I don't know if I'm that far off the road or if I'm weaving or what's bringing that on, but it's kind of it's making me more aware of my driving, so it's a good thing. And then we got they're talking about the logbooks, and I guess when this was published, this is a 2015, 2016 course is when it started. The debate was still going about whether we were going to electronic logbooks. Well, that happened 2 years ago. And so there's no paper logbooks for professional drivers now. They're all electronically logged in. And then it talks about cold chain technology and transportation. Okay, so this is kind of, 3rd grade, you learned about computers and networks and servers and the internet. And so it's kind of just starting from the basics here. I know that we Ivy Tech doesn't have its own servers. We found that the expense in upgrading and leasing software and housing those servers for at the time it was like 125 students, active and inactive, and then the faculty was another 800 or 900. The cost was just almost prohibitive for us to maintain our own servers. And so we've been leasing server access from IUPUI. And so it's still a state asset, it's a state school, and we get a better rate by combining our resources with them. At times it becomes an issue because they have their own schedules when they want to update and when they want to run new type of software, we have to adapt to it. So, but a server is basically like your hard drive, only it's huge and it can process a lot more software and it can store a lot more data. One of the things we're finding out is China is buying farmland in the US, and they're also using that land to build, instead of farms, they're putting these server farms there. And so some government agencies and Amazon and Microsoft, they have these huge warehouses, and the only thing in them are servers. And so they're temperature monitored to make sure the equipment's operating properly. There's security around it to make sure nobody can get in there and steal different kinds of user information and trade secrets. But it really is amazing how much data is out there. And I was reading an article that was talking about since 9/11, the federal government has recorded every text, every phone call, every email that's been sent into or out of the United States. So that is a lot of traffic that they have, and that's a lot of information that they have about citizens that aren't doing any type of criminal activity, that they could drill down and know more about you and your family than you do, just based on your interaction with the internet and your communications amongst each other. So it's kind of Orwellian, the whole server, and how much our government and other governments of the world are interested in our information. We are the product when it comes to the internet, the users. So this kind of talks about the electronic data exchange, and I'm old enough to where we could write out, hey, we need such and such on a piece of paper. It'd be like a purchase order, pencil, paper, write it out. And then you'd mail it, or you'd send somebody to take it to the supplier, and they'd have to read your writing and like, what is this person ordering? We don't, what? And there'd be some kind of a drop in the communication there that could cause an issue with the order being accurate or being on time, or, just a bunch of things. And so the next generation, which I'm old enough, I was involved in that too, is that we faxed it. And so we would type it instead of just, we didn't have the ability for like a Word document to be sent in an email. We'd have to type it. And then we'd take that paper, typewritten, legible order, and we feed it into a scanner that would scan that document and send it to the user. Well, that was an improvement, because if I said I needed 25 cases of water, it was in print and legible, and the other person could read that. And, it improved the ability to get the right accuracy involved in it. Well, the next generation was where software could be put into an electronic exchange like an email, and I could just type out what I wanted and directly send it instead of trying to scan it. And not, if you type on a typewriter and you make an error, you're either going to put like white paint over it, or you're going to have a mess. And so you had to do it right, or you had to redo it. And so now we have the ability to make corrections, or to update it, or to use that same format over and over again. And again, it was a time saving, and it also made it a lot more legible, and the orders were coming out like they were supposed to. Now we're at this level where the human factor of sending emails even isn't involved in it. And so all of this process takes place automatically. It's a language between the transmitting, receiving stations, and it can go back and forth based on the conversation and the framework or the format of how that order would go. And so this one example here has got a shipper who's looking for a truck company to send their items. And so they initiate step one. A shipper initiates an EDI, this electronic conversation, 204, which is the way that the format is. It's like a form, basically, for a full truckload motor carrier. So this goes out there to all the different companies that are in the business of providing this service. And so they kind of give a, hey, we need some help here next week, and we need some stuff taken care of. And so in step two, the shipper, distribution, wholesale, the drivers respond to it with another form. This one they're saying is a 990. You're not going to be tested, I don't believe, or I don't ever seen that anywhere where you had to recall what those forms were numbered. When you took your quizzes, did anybody run into that where they asked for the EDI numbers for the forms?
I don't remember running into that.
No, I mean, I took this same exam that you folks did, but it's been a year. And I try to get out there and do all the quizzes with you to make sure that if they change something that I'm up to snuff on that. But here's the conversation happening electronically between the shipper and the trucking company. And it gets down to where they accept the job, and then so now they're going to send the size vehicles they need to haul whatever the contract would, they're anticipating how much space they're going to need. And then it receives a dispatch to send it to the facility. And so now they enter into this 210, which is where the contract actually gets written out as to what accommodations need to be made, the time frame, how much they're charging for their rate, and all that. So those steps are listed here as to how like a purchase order for transportation occurs. Now, this happens thousands of times a day just in one company. And so you can imagine with the hundreds of thousands of trucking companies and shippers and different people that want to interact, that having people involved in this, it would still be slower and it'd be more human error involvement. So having this electronic exchange here speeds it up, and the accuracy is a much more improved. And so talking about the transportation management system, it's very similar to when you were going through the intro class and learning about the warehouse management system, where it had the list of all the inventory, where everything was located, how long it was there, all that kind of stuff. This one, it's going to have three major areas here. And the first one is the rating area. So this TMS helps shipping managers choose the carriers with the best costs for factoring in issues like freight of all kind, grouping, discounts, and accessories. And so I go into this software and I'm looking for the right type of trucking company that could maybe have refrigeration, or they would have a higher security rating. They haven't lost any of their stuff. So there's like a 4-star, 5-star, or a number rating that comes with that truck company for whatever type of shipment that you're shopping for. This software also helps with routing. And so it selects the optional route. You know, if you're going to have to ship this through rush hour, what's the alternate route to avoid all that? Or if you got construction going on, how long is this going to take now? And a lot of this TMS keys on taking right turns. And so you don't have to cross another oncoming lane and have to wait for that lane to clear. You can just take a right turn when you come up to an intersection and make a box to get over to the left side of that intersection. And they did studies, I think it was FedEx that did it first, to find out if that improved fuel mileage, delivery times, less accidents, and all of those numbers favored taking right turns instead of waiting for the light, because idling burns fuel and it burns time, and the frustration of being stuck in traffic, all of that stuff figured into it. They came up with, okay, our drivers are going to, the majority of the routes are going to take right turns to get to their final destination. So then we got reporting. And so TMS helps shipping managers track carrier performance, customer service, cost, and other measures of carrier quality. So this reporting is like a report card. And if it's absolutely they're on time 90% of the time, and that's the most important thing to you, that's the one that you want to go with. And there's other ones that make sure I've invited everybody in. Yeah. And there's other things that may be important to you that you could select based on the ratings that they have in their report card. So we've seen these before. They're on about anything that you can buy is going to have this printed barcode. And so there is a lot of information on there. I mean, it makes inventory and it makes tracking inventory a world of difference. The bad part is once it's printed, it's static. You can't change it. And so, like it talks about FedEx using it and UPS to scan barcodes on their labels for packages that are moving. Well, it's going to tell where the final destination is, and if it's going to go through one of their processing centers, it may even say what door it would arrive in, what door it would go out of, and what truck that it goes on what route. All of that can be incorporated in that barcode because that's one label that's got one direction that's going in. And so all that information can be static. It's not going to change in the middle of the route. So, and if it's a barcode, you have to be able to see the barcode. It has to be line of sight. And so you have a scanner of some kind that would read that. So that's fine in like a warehouse, or you're in the middle of a shipping section and you're getting all the stuff out. That works okay in that situation. But we got other situations where you may have to have a stronger security, or you may have to have the ability to change things on the route, or you can't see it. And so here's where radio frequency identification come in. It's got a little picture of one here. And this is the stuff that goes off when you walk out of the store. It hasn't been disabled. And they are much smaller versions of that for almost every part in your phone that was made in different countries. And that's so they can track things like the inventory, the quality, but they're supposed to be shut off whenever they get into assembly. You know, when Apple gets it, they go into deactivating all these tracking chips, and sometimes they don't get them all shut off. And so different countries that have sold components to you for your phone, it's not just iPhones, they actually can track things like when your use of it, how long you're on it, and where it geographically is, and how long you keep it. And if it's one of the processors that can actually follow where you go as far as your internet activity. So there's a lot of security issues that get a little bit out of control when it's not line of sight, it's picked up by radio frequency. And this is talking about how it speeded up the process of loading, unloading, and tracking. It says it's the inventory stock changed to 94% quicker. So yeah, that was a major upgrade on how we do business. And they're using used to be a cost associated with something like 20 cents a piece. Now they're like 5 for a penny. So they're on everything. I mean, everything. And once we went to G5, that G5 allowed the tracking of more items within a warehouse space. Now they can track in a 7-acre building, which is about the average size of a warehouse now, 5 million different inventory items. And so they can get down into the inst with just the warehouse software. So that crosses over the TMS, the transportations crosses over whenever it's delivered. It's tracked it all the way from the supplier to that warehouse, and then it could be moved over into the inventory. I don't know why I'm getting an audience there with the dogs. Thanks, somebody's at my door. So global positioning systems, and this was an invention of the military to try to help us to keep track of where our equipment is on like a battlefield, and we can track dangerous people, or we could coordinate different types of movement with our equipment. And so all of those satellites for GPS were launched by the military. And once they saw the usefulness of knowing where you were on the earth in real time, transportation, like aviation, rail and trucks, they all said, hey, we'd like to be able to track our vehicles and where those where our freight is in real time. And so all of these satellites were augmented with civilian type, you know, they launched their own satellites to be able to make this a more structured way to track where people are. I know from the old school, you know, I joined the Army in 1977. was probably older than your parents. We had to triangulate to figure out where we were on a map. So we would have a map, we'd have a compass, and we'd look to the right and say, okay, over there is a hilltop with a church. And we look on the map and we find out where that was on the map. There's the church on that hilltop. Then we look to the other side. We say, okay, over there is a cliff. There's a big drop off, and we find that on the map. And we would do whatever our compass said, like that was 118 degrees. This one was 90 degrees. We would add 180 to do a back azimuth to bring it backwards. Where those two intersected would tell me where I was standing. And so that's how we triangulated to figure out where we were before there were satellites, is using compasses and maps and looking for terrain features that we could identify and find on the map. So they took all of that out of it, which was probably about, I'd say, 3 weeks of basic training, was being miserable out in the woods, getting lost all the time, learning how to do that. So now new service folks, they have GPS to tell them exactly where they're going, how many steps it is, when they're going to get there. They can use their phone or their watch, you know, if the military didn't give them something. And so they do. They have GPS that helps weapons stay on track when they fire a missile and all that. Well, recently, we didn't know it, but China had their own fleet of satellites launched. And we were still working on having enough satellites, because this was saying that there's twice a day that these 24 satellites would rotate. It's much more than 24 satellites now. So now, because China has most of their businesses with us, their ships leave, and 3 weeks later they show up on our shores, and they weren't having a real-time tracking of where that ship was. We had trains squared away, we had trucks, we even had pipelines squared away. But ships, that was the one that we hadn't figured out how to track where that ship was 24 hours a day to know where a cargo was. And so somewhere around 3 years ago, China launched enough satellites that they were able to start tracking their ships coming to us and coming back. And just this year, I'm talking 2022, 23, they shared that technology with us. So now we know where our stuff is, it's going to them, and we know where their stuff is, it's coming to us. And that's because they launched the network of satellites that made that possible. And this is saying that, yeah, that was the figure for this one. Okay. So this collision avoidance system, which driving my first car, I was telling you about that. Thank God you can shut it off. It sometimes becomes aggravating, but the one that keeps you from head-on collision, that stops you if you're not paying attention, you get close to truck, that you can never shut off. And so people that are fatigued, you know, driving, they're saying that that's about 20% of the accidents now. It's not drug related, it's not equipment failure, it's just driver fatigue. People are trying to get to the, you know, they're on a 10-mile drive or 10-hour drive, and they've been in traffic and everything. Now it's a 12-hour drive and 14-hour drive. Instead of getting a room, they're going to push through, and that's when there's a lot of people that are fatigued, and they get into these accidents. Plus technology, where you got the phones, you're distracted, you're looking at some video, or you're watching a movie or something while you're driving. It's crazy. The people, what I've seen them doing when I'm driving, I just glance over. They've got, let's see, a sandwich in one hand, a drink in the other, and they're watching a movie. And they're the only person in the car. And so I'm giving them all the room they need to, you know, run into a pole or whatever. That's just not me. But this collision avoidance system was like step one to unmanned delivery. And so they have fleets of trucks that can go across the plains, you know, where it's just 400 miles of nothing but tumbleweeds. But there's still a live driver in like the front of this convoy of 6 or 8 of these trucks that just follow the truck in front of it. So it's not completely automated, but it's like now I can take 8 truckloads or pairs of truckloads with just one driver. that will probably never be a non-human interacted function when it comes to delivery of freight, because the last mile, when you get into traffic where a collision could have happened, and yeah, GPS will say traffic's not moving, stop truck, it'll signal to tell the truck to stop, but it doesn't let it think on how to find another route around it. It'll give it these different types of scenarios, take a left here, go down, but does it know that another car just pulled out on the side of it and it's in its blind spot and it can't see it, and it causes an accident. Drones, that's supposed to be the way that they're going to try to resolve that, where they can take pallet-sized loads by drone the last mile. And those, again, would be operated by humans. They'd be interfaced to see where it's going and making sure it doesn't drop the pallet load of bricks on, kids' playground or something. So this collision avoidance is the next evolution in safety and in trying to make more transportation move with less operators, supposedly. And we got to say relic here, a picture of a logbook that you actually wrote in. And as I said, that's been a change that these are no longer used. The big pushback was the cost of the software that you would have to install. Say I only own one truck, and if I had to spend $10,000 to get the software and get the monitoring equipment that's put in the vehicle, it just makes it cost prohibitive. It'd take me a month of my salary to pay for this required technology. And they've got this now to where it's almost as simple as an app, where you can download the app to your company, and your company has the servers and stuff that are monitoring where all their trucks are. So the costs got rolled back when technology got in front of it. It's amazing. I mean, if you're exceeding the speed limit and you're driving, your dispatcher that's at your company's headquarters or warehouse or wherever they're coming out, the hub, they can actually send you a warning, which would make your truck kind of slow down. Or they'll just say, okay, next exit, this truck's going to be turned off. You have like 6 minutes to find a parking spot or whatever. So they are getting more and more involved because of 9/11, safety issues, security issues, but they're really trying to get their arms around this driver fatigue. And so I think we go into that next. The hours of operation, let's see, not yet. Okay, so this talks about other technology. It's the way to keep freight that has to be in a climate refrigerated, and some have to be heated in the wintertime. There's certain types of software or hardware that is so delicate that if it got below 70 degrees, it wouldn't function properly. And so you actually have to send a heated trailer to go pick that up. But it's talking about the different types of packaging that you can do. They've got active shipper packaging and passive shipper packaging. So active shipper packaging has these climate control containers with fans and dry ice or refrigeration. And they say most of them have 2 refrigeration units, as a backup. You got the second one, or to maintain the freezing if that's what you're going for. And any of those extras like this is going to cost you more per mile to have that cargo delivered. And they get into passive, and that's where when it leaves the warehouse to be shipped, we know that the contents of this needs to be kept, below 70 degrees or 60 degrees. And they'll put gel packs in there or dry ice. And they're talking about this other, what is that? Ectic plates. It's similar to the gel packs. And they have something like a 24-hour. Some of them, if they are really, insulated, like in a styrofoam box, they can go 36 to 72 hours and still stay below this temperature where there would be a situation. I get medicine from the VA like every 2 months, and I get this big styrofoam cooler with 20,000 gel packs and one little box of medicine in there that's got to keep refrigerated. And so they deliver it to the front door. They send me emails saying, hey, it's coming. Text, hey, it's going to be there in 15 minutes. So it doesn't sit on my porch for a weekend and then go bad. But yeah, there's all types of different types of medication, people across the country that are getting those kind of deliveries all the time. So they need this passive type of package. So a FedEx employee can drop it off to me. They don't have to send a refrigerated truck here and hope that I'm home and hand it to me and say, go stick this in your refrigerator. So it talks a little bit here too about ocean carriers and how we move this refrigerated cargo. They got conventional reefers, and that's ships that have temperature control throughout the whole ship cargo hatch area. And they can raise and lower stuff by pallet loads down into the hull of it that's like a freezer. And then they got containerized reefers. And so I got regular containers, like it's a truck trailer, that's about the size of a container. And they have refrigeration units on them. And so they would be on a separate section of the ship that would either keep them fueled, or they would have some type of an electrical hookup to where they would keep these refrigerators running the whole entire time the ship's moving. And then they got side door reefers. They're reefer ships that have a controlled temperature throughout and allow cargo to go in and out through the side of the ship. And so it actually would have doors that raise up and you could take the cargo out the side. Most of the time, these ships that have these different types of climate control on them are much faster. They are smaller, so they can get to where they're going in the shortest amount of time and not cause any of the loss from the temperature being warmer than it was supposed to be. So it gives us a summary that we talked about: EDI, TMS, the barcodes, the difference between them, and the it's by site, and the RFIDs can be anywhere that you don't have to be able to see it. And then GPS is, of course, satellite. And you normally need at least 3. The book says 4, but technology's improved now to where they only really need 3 satellites to be able to pinpoint any place on the planet within like 10 inches. I can still remember the first GPS I got that was trying to tell me where to go, like a JoJo or a Pom Pom or whatever they were, Tom Tom. And it would say, this will get you within 50 yards of where you're going to. And so if you're in a city environment and you're looking for your turn, it could actually give you the wrong turn because there was a drive or there was a turn that was within 50 yards of where you were. And so as more satellites were launched, the technology got better where it can tell me which driveway I need to pull into. That was always a guess, in the earlier days. Okay, so here's where you went through your practice scenario. And I think I did some, there was a, maybe that's in 6. So we'll pick that up there. So let's take a intermission on the death by PowerPoint field that's going on with this. And let's go back to our class and look at what else we had for this week. I believe I can drag this over, but let's just open it here. We have a discussion board, I'm sure. Let's look in module 5. So we've got this research paper, and we discussed this off camera before we recorded. I just wanted to give you a heads up here that we want to start looking at finding a subject that you want to write about, and it can be over a 3PL. And I kind of would push that one more than the other ones because 3PL is an area that you can use a certification to earn more money to be a third-party provider for logistics. And you could go into a business with yourself, or you could join a smaller organization that really does pay quite well. So I would investigate that. If you haven't really got a preference on which one to write about, I'd do 3PL. But if you're safety oriented, you might be doing something at work that would be beneficial to your job besides doing the assignment, then by all means, take the safety paper and write about that. And we are still learning about the different modes of transportation. We just talked about those container ships that have the refrigeration available to them. So if you were talking about ships, you could do your research and talk about all the different capacities that they have in that particular area. And that there's been some questions about the assignment, so let's open. And when we do, it's telling you need a 3 to 5 page paper about the company that you've selected for 3PL, or about the different modes of transportation. And that 3 to 5 was including a cover and a reference page. So if it's 5, it's really 3 pages. And if it's 3, it's really 1 page. But what I'm looking for is just for you to get the point across. I'm not going to go count words. I'm not going to count pages. I do want to see if you know how to research. And so I'm going to be looking at your references and saying, oh, that's a good reference. They went out to the Department of Labor, or they went out to the Department of Transportation, or they went to Indiana Department of Transportation to find out about restrictions for drivers in our state, or they went to the ports of Indiana and looked at those 4 different ports and saw what kind of ships that use those ports. So it's interesting to me to find out where you got your information, the references. And we also talked a little about this AI chat thing that's going around. It's a downloadable app that you can just say what types of ships use the Indiana ports, and this will research all of that for you and put it in a understandable paper that you could use as part of your assignment. So it doesn't tell me that you use that AI chat. It's a tool that's available to you. I'm just trying to get used to how I want to grade that, as far as how much of this is you and how much of this did you just get given to you by that software. I haven't seen homework from it, so I'm kind of curious how that's going to look. I probably won't be able to tell the difference. But I have had folks that are in discussion boards and they write something like, Jack and Jill went up the hill. You know, they keep it kind of basic. And then when they do a research paper, it sounds like a PhD thesis, like, in as much as there was a variation to the parameters. And I'm like, this does not sound like the way that this student talks or writes. And so it's that noticeable. So I'm not an English major, but I hope I get to know you well enough to know what your work looks like. And so I can pick it out that, yeah, this person's voice that I'm hearing coming through in the research. So that they want you to have references. This is also saying to provide a SWOT analysis. That's just to make it have some kind of a flow. And SWOT is a strength, a weakness, opportunity, and threats. You can do that by looking at their competition to get their weakness and their threats. You can get their opportunities by seeing who's doing it the best. If their competition's beating them, you can say they have an opportunity by taking this new technology that Apple's using, or what have you. So that won't be a killer if you don't use a SWOT analysis, but it gives you context and it gives you a page that you can put into your paper by doing that analysis on whatever your company is. That's it. And this is giving you some ideas about what kind of elements to put in it. I'm not going to go down the checklist here and say you covered all of that. That would be 10 pages to try to cram all that in it. This is just a guideline to give you some ideas to start from. And here we can give you links to go to for different types of research areas. And I think I might have mentioned this in our previous communications, but let me open this up. There is a whole society out there for our supply chain. And let's try it in TRANS, Transportation Drive. And they all are Drive. And so if we look at, make sure I'm going to the right place. That's a trucking school. That's not it. Okay. I'm still looking for what I would. That one may have been an odd one to do for Transportation Drive. I can get to it through, let's call it supply chain. So Supply Chain Drive has all of the different elements under it. So, or it's dive, I'm sorry. So we have a deep dive in all of these different elements of the supply chain. So you can do a deep dive into transportation, procurement, warehousing, any type of regulations, but these sites are what's happening right now in industry. And so I belong to all of those. And when you sign up for it, there's no cost. They don't aggravate you to death, but you got operations, procurement, logistics, and then the daily dive. You get something sent to you that tells what's happening in industry. And it's pretty interesting. And they don't try to sell you anything, or they don't try to give your stuff away. It gets a conversation going among people in those fields. So that's an opportunity for you to add some meat to your project. Okay, we're going back. Any questions about that paper? I'd like to see that by week 7. So those of you that are just waiting for the oomph, by week 7, we want to have all your focus on just taking and passing your exam. So let's not drag this out. Let's take a look at the modules again. We're back to tonight, and we have a discussion board. So let's go ahead and knock that out. And this is what's the difference between freight forwarders and freight brokers? And then give an example. And it says use this figure in the textbook as to why do you think freight forwarders and freight brokers fall below a 3PL. So I put that picture pulled that picture up for our discussion. And so here's the part where I'm going to have you guys help me out here and tell me what your thoughts are on the differences in these 3 different levels of service. So go ahead.
Aren't freight brokers usually more like hands-off compared to freight forwarders or 3PLs?
Yes. And so you see the commitment part here, responsibility. And freight brokers, what's one of the major things they can't do as far as documentation?
They can't generate their own BOLs.
Yes. And so, yeah, you could be somebody that's got this really tight-knit network and know people who could provide a service and know customers that need that service. And you just make the money by connecting those two, and you don't have any kind of warehouses, trucks, nothing. And you're hands off. So you don't have to have the insurances, you don't have to have the legal backing and all that kind of stuff. You're basically, if somebody is new and I would go to a freight broker if I was doing business, say in Mexico. I'd want somebody who knows all the national laws and how to get stuff moved around in that country. And I would be willing to pay a premium for somebody that would give me a responsible transportation package to be able to bring my stuff to market there. What about freight forwarding? The major difference.
Everything they do everything except for, warehousing and the manufacturing and shipping, but they just focus on the transportation, getting it from the beginning to the user.
Okay. And there's some instances, say I'm working with a customer and I'm a freight forwarder, and they said, hey, I want to get my product to China. You folks know all the customs and how to get the stuff through the border. You know the language and the culture. And I get it over there. And I said, okay, I got too much stuff. Can you find me a warehouse? That freight forwarder still has the ability to offer more services to that customer. They take it a step farther than just the broker that got it there. But seldom ever are they asset based. And what's that mean? They don't have their own warehouses. They don't have their own trucks. So again, they're doing this. They've got relationships with people they've done business with. They know what their ratings are. This is A+ type service. My customer's willing to pay the extra to make sure his cargo is secure and stored securely. So what about a 3PL? The major difference between it and the other two.
They would be more hands-on, right? Like they'd work more directly with the other companies.
Yeah. And they can be asset based, right? They can have their own trucks, they can have their own warehousing and all that, ships, everything. And everybody wants to look like a 3PL because the 3PLs have great reputations about doing what you need done better and less expensive than you could do it yourself. And so if I was going to try to put like a roof on my house, oh man, yeah, I could get up on a ladder and tear stuff up, but the end product would probably cost me more and not be as well done as a professional who would just come in, get the same materials less, get it done in one day where I've been spending the whole summer, and have a higher quality output. So it's the same thing when it comes to 3PLs. They have this reputation. You can find the right company that has the experience and the expertise to do the job that you need done. And you just don't have to worry about it anymore. They have the insurance. You tell them what you're looking for, you get a contract, and they'll come in and actually manage your organization for you. They'll come into a manufacturing environment or a warehouse environment, a truck transportation environment. They will provide the employees and the supervisors like a temp agency, only these are all experts in that particular field that come in and do the job where I didn't have to go out and hire people. I didn't have to worry about, am I going to have the right staffing? These are all trained and ready to go folks, so I'm not going to lose anything on that, where they're actually learning new skills, that training trade-off that happens. They show up the first day, they're already humming along at the 85, 90% capacity to get the job done. And so 3PLs they're so vast, there's so many of them that they actually have a 4PL, fourth level, and they all take care of managing 3PLs. And so I can go and say, hey, look, I've got ships, I've got trucks, I've got warehouses, I got manufacturing, and I got these other third-party providers running all those things for me, but I need one person or one agency to answer to because I don't want to be aggravated by 6 or 8 of these different 3PLs that are working for me. They can go to a 4PL and they take care of managing all the 3PLs. And so as lazy as you want to be, you can pay for the service and it's still operating, industry best as far as having the right leadership and techniques and experience and all that. So wherever you are in your career, say you're like 8 or 10 years into it, that experience that you have, if you take it to a commercial, how much is my experience worth? You could be at that 3PL level now, working towards being able to manage all these other assets within a 3PL to be at a 4PL. And I've seen 4PLs that had 10 employees and they were running like 5 or 6 3PLs for each customer. They'd have 10 customers, 50 different 3PLs, 10 people were running. So software, the way that we can remotely do things now, where we can have meetings and we can just fly out and we can walk the place if we want to, but it's really having the right person on the ground that's accomplishing the service that makes a difference in a great 3PL and a great 4PL. And so be that, and you and your kids will never go hungry. Everybody will never go hungry because that is something that can't be outsourced. If they need the warehouses managed in Indiana, you're going to have to come here to do it. If they need it managed in Mexico or Canada or China, you're going to have somebody at that other end of the chain that keeps the supply chain humming along at a quality level. Okay, so let's go back to our class and we will pick up chapter 6 or block 6, which is the regulations. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a yee-haw moment, but it's pretty decent the way they lay it out here. I think we may have briefly covered the Uniform Commercial Code. You're going to get neck deep into that when you take procurement. because there's a whole certification within procurement. There's 6 certifications, and then you get to be a procurement specialist certification after you go through all 6 of those. And every week in that class, you're taking a certification test. It's self-paced. You don't have to go to a test center or anything like that. But you are earning these building block certifications to get to that procurement. And there's one just on contracts. And here's where you are going to get that deep, eyebrow deep in the Uniform Commercial Code. And it's telling about what is common law, like common sense law, and what is contract law, and how we've developed this where every state has agreed to it, except which one? One state doesn't recognize
Louisiana.
uniform. What is it?
Louisiana.
You are correct, sir. That's a bonus point for you.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, there's always got to be one state that says, "No, I don't want to do that." And in Louisiana, you can have a verbal contract that holds up all the way to their state Supreme Court. And in other states, it needs to be in a written format, or, a handshake as a person's word is that's gospel. And there's some other things that they do differently than all the other 49 states have agreed to do business, and all of our different folks that are part of the U.S. family, Puerto Rico and all the other sites. They all fall under this uniform code. And so federal motor safety carrier regulations, that's the stuff they put together for trucks, buses, any kind of commercial traffic that's on roadways. And they try to come up with the best ways to design roads, safety, all that kind of stuff. And then cabotage, however you want to say that. Sounds like a card game I was no good at. But this basically is going to talk about the Jones laws that says our country protects all of the transportation between ports. And so if you're going to sell from like Texas to California or Florida, it explains you have to be a U.S. ship. You have to have a U.S. captain, 75% of the crew, all that kind of stuff has to be U.S. So then that protects our marine shipping to make it a U.S. led service. Okay. So contracts, we're going to hit on 3 major things here. That's the offer, the acceptance, and the consideration. And so what does it take to make an offer when it comes to putting together a contract? Well, here it's saying it's a proposal or an expression presented by individuals or groups when they're willing to complete a task. For example, a shipper asks a trucker to move 20 pallets, each weighing 50 pounds from Boston to Baltimore for $1,800 on October 10th. The shipper made a specific offer and a specific volume on a specific date from a specific place to a destination for a specific price. So that's an offer. Now, they might send this out using the transportation management system to 10 different trucking companies that they find are like number one best at what they do. And what comes back would be like an acceptance. And so it's legal contracts do not exist until offers are formally accepted in written or verbal forms. Digital now is considered written, of course, though they usually are acceptance that do not always need to be the same as the offers. In fact, UCC states, that's Uniform Code of Contracts, states acceptances can add terms which can become part of the contract. So they can say, we'll do it, but 2,000, or we'll do it, but it's going to be 2 trucks instead of a truck, So when it's not the same, it's called a negotiation. And so after they negotiate with a counter offer, wait till you folks start buying houses. And somebody wants to say, this is a crazy housing market we're in, but let's just say they want $400,000 per house. And you have somebody appraise it. And they say, well, in today's market, this one's probably worth about $450. So yeah, it's a good buy. but you should try to offer them maybe 375. And so you give a counter offer of 375. And then they go, look, I got 5 people that offer me 400,000, so I'm declining your counter offer. People are paying over asking price right now for housing. So it doesn't, if you can hold off for just a couple more years where this thing works its way out, there's going to be plenty of housing. But the meeting of minds is when you're like, okay, I'll pay you the 400,000. Can I do 405 and buy the house? Then there's a meeting of minds, because you know it's worth at least 450 from the appraisal. You're giving the owner what they want, and you're entering into an acceptance there. Then you got a consideration. It's a mutual obligation which the parties are bound by contracts to perform certain level and agree to carry out their responsibilities. So considerations can hold value, give contracts legal validity. That help me out here. In the example above, 1,800 the shipper agreed to pay was a consideration. The consideration, saying the trucker accepted the offer, was stated by emailing the agreement. The trucker agreed to move the goods in exchange for 1,800. But they could have said 2,000. And then there would have been a negotiation and got it down to 19. And so the consideration was taking another $100 to make sure that it went through. So you got the offer. That's what I want, when I want it, where it's going, what I'll pay for it. You got the acceptance, and there could be almost accepted where there's a negotiation. And then when both of the parties come to the same conclusion, it's a meeting of the minds. And then the consideration might be that, hey, this has to be done with refrigerated special cars, and I need bonded agents, and I need to have an update every 3 hours. I mean, there's other things they can add to the offer that make it more valid than, before. So there's an activity here that lets you drag and drop. I think I took a picture of that so we could save from having to go through that. But it looks like the offer is, I realize that the MSRP on the car sticker is $24,500, but I will buy it for, say, $22,000. That's an offer. We would like your trucking company to haul our products in 4 separate loads. That's an offer. The catalog value price is $1,000 per unit. We can pay $950. So they're already saying, here's an offer. It's not what you wanted, but can we negotiate? And then the consideration is, great, we'll send you a purchase order 1, 2, 3 to authorize these costs. Okay, I understand. We'll have a purchase order for your system tomorrow. Here is a deposit check for $1,000. I'll have the balance from my bank sent to you tomorrow. So that's a consideration, like, we want to do it, but we haven't got all the pieces that we said, to make it an acceptance. We can accept $22,200 for that specific car. So they got it from $24,500 down to $22,200. Okay, we can offer you a loyalty discount based on additional annual revenue or volume. So, if I've got a truck that company that has been getting a lot of my business, and I'm a repeat customer, they could come back and cut me a break because they know they're going to make more money in the future. The catalog price is already discounted for customers. 1,000 down is the minimum that we'll take. So that was your little drag and drop thing that you don't have to go through. But you might want to, just to see how you can match up those terms. Then you got the quick quiz, and that's where you get your points for knowing that you went through that chapter or that part of it. So here we're talking about the Uniform Commercial Code. And even Louisiana uses these terms, when it comes to how they are moving freight, as to who pays for the charges, who owns the goods, and if something happens, who can file a claim against the insurance. And so this freight on board, FOB, is the destination, and then it says freight prepaid. So if somebody's paying for it before it actually moves, it says that the freight charges are going to be by the seller. So I'm saying that, let's say this trailer would cost $100 a cent. But if you want me to pay ahead, it's 150. So I'm paying the $50 freight. And so I own it because you haven't paid me anything yet. When it gets in transit, if something happens to it, it still belongs to me. And then if something happened to it, my insurance, any claims made, it would belong to me. So the seller is taking all the risk on this. And seldom will you see this transaction because people want the buyer to take most of the risk. But if it's something that's I'm buying and I haven't ever seen it, I haven't done business with them before, I might say, hey, I need you to do it this way, just so I've got less risk. And if you want to do continued business, you will make this up in your next shipment to me. So this isn't the most common way that they do business, but it is used out there. Then we got FOB destination, same as the last one was, freight collected. So I'm a buyer and I said, okay, my trailer's 100, the freight's 50. Here's the 50. When I see it and I inspect it, I'll pay for the actual freight. And so responsibility of paying for the freight charges, it says freight collected, buyer. But it still belongs to the seller until it gets paid for. So if anything happens in transit, insurance is on the seller, they get the claim. Freight on board, destination prepaid. So that's two things that's seller, right? And added a charge back to the buyer on the invoice. It's the same stuff as this other one was. They just said, okay, we'll pay for everything and then we'll get you to pay for it when we deliver. Down here, it's on the invoice as a charge that the freight is going to be paid for by the buyer. But they're still not paying for it until it shows up. So the seller has got freight charges they pay up front, they own it in transit, and if anything happens to it, it's still theirs to make a claim. So we got FOB shipping point. Now this gets kind of a little bit flowery because let's say the shipping point is not from the seller. Let's say the seller manufactures stuff and he's got a warehouse or she's got a warehouse that's in Florida. They're making stuff in Indiana, but they want the shipping point to start in Florida where that warehouse is. So we got freight on board shipping point, freight prepaid. And anytime it's prepaid, that means that the person buying it has put money out to make sure it gets shipped. And so let's just say that I'm leaving it from my Florida warehouse because the buyer lives in Florida. So I'm saving them freight by moving it from one of my closer warehouses. So the seller is responsible for paying for the charges. The buyer owns it and transportation and can buy claims. So the freight was listed in the invoice. And so the buyer is paying for all of that. FOB shipping point, freight collected, buyer. Freight on board shipping point, freight prepaid and added. It's a chargeback. So seller, buyer. And when you get into INSCOM terms, that's what they're talking about here is the different types of ways that you can ship it and who's responsible for it. And then the other course that you take online, there is a whole project you have to do with INSCOM terms. And so here's as far as you're going to go with it is discovering what these terms mean in this chapter. But in a work environment, they would expect you to know what different ways that organization ships and which one of these terms or who's responsible for it based on how it's shipped. So this is an area that you probably want to pick up in your memory. Okay. Federal safety regulations come from the Federal Motor Bureau Safety Administration. This is how they define commercial vehicles. Vehicle that has a gross weight in excess of 10,000 pounds. A vehicle that's designed to transport more than 8 passengers for hire. A vehicle designed to transport more than 15 passengers, including the driver, without compensation. A vehicle is of any size and is used to transport hazardous material in quantities which require a place card, that thing that goes outside of the trailer that tells what kind of chemical is in there. And so let's say I'm driving all of you on a school trip And what do we got? We got 6 or 7 of you in the class and me. And the school gives us a van. Am I a commercial driver? Hello?
No.
Ah, so it says a vehicle designed to use to transport more than 15 passengers. So I'm in a van. It's not designed to be more than 15 passengers. It's only 9. So I'm not. Now, if I drive the school's bus, they have these shuttle buses. They are designed to haul 16 passengers. If I drive it and there's 16 passengers, I have to have a CDL. If I drive it and there's 15 passengers, I can have a chauffeur's license. And so I've done this, is why I know. I drove them to, we went on a trip down to Cumberland Falls for biology. I took some biology students and I took some transportation students. And my transportation students figured the route, and they figured how much fuel costs. They figured the wear and tear on the vehicle, the lodging. They did all the figure on how much it was going to cost the school to sponsor that trip. They did all that. And so they got to go down there and watch people wade around creeks and measure frogs and turn rocks over for crawfish and stuff like that. But they got to spend a weekend, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, in the outdoors down there, mountains and streams and all that stuff. So we did that with 15, because if I'd have had 16, I'd have had to have a CDL license. And I didn't want to go through that. So that's kind of the broad picture of what it is to be a driver, according to the Department of Transportation. And then this puts you through that same activity we just did. All right. So the Safety Administration says for Motor Carrier Administration driver rules, must be at least 20 years old to operate between states. Must be at least 18-year-old to operate within a state. This is something that Ohio, Michigan, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana are trying to work on to make it a regional license. And so they could still take stuff to Michigan, Ohio, Tennessee, Illinois, Kentucky, and be 18. Federal government has to approve that. But we're so short on drivers, we're trying to get the age requirement down where, you know, ladies and gentlemen out of high school can do it. You have to be at least 21 if you're transporting hazardous material. And it requires the place cards telling what kind of chemical you got, if it's fire resistant or what have you. They have to speak English and understand English well enough to communicate with the general public and be able to read the regulations and understand what the regulations are. Be able to operate a commercial vehicle safely. So usually you have to have some kind of a training before you get a license. Have the ability and training to safely load and secure cargo. Depending on what you're driving, like if it's a hazardous material, you have to know how that hazardous material has to be stored and what it can be setting next to. If it's 2 different chemicals that, if they ever combine, would make an explosion, they are not supposed to be in the same vehicle. Possesses a valid medical examination certificate or medical waivers and exemptions. Even when I did that chauffeur license, I had to go through a complete physical. And I mean, my eyes, they had to check those to make sure with corrective lens I could see my closest reaction. They did heart scans, all this, like I'm going to stroke out, you know, if I'm driving. So yeah, that's no joke, that driver's medical examination. Possess a valid driver's license for the type of vehicle being operated. So again, I had chauffeur's license for that bus that had 16 passengers, but we only took 15 and me. We actually got pulled over and they counted people when they checked my license. Oh, you're not a CDL. We'll see how many folks are on here. This one is a little wonky, this hours of service. And remember in the beginning, where you're not keeping this book anymore for how long you've been operating, it's all automated. And so now the automation will tell you you have 2 hours of driving left, you should find your destination or find a place to secure your load, because you are now being required to, and unless there's a situation where you only need another hour to get to your destination or something, you can be fined if you just keep driving through those warnings when you've exceeded your operating hours. And so it says drivers can drive up to 11 hours following 10 consecutive hours off. So you don't get to just take like a 1 hour nap in a rest area and then you're back at it. That's not what they're talking about there. However, in no case should drivers drive for 14 hours after coming on duty. And so let's say you had 10 hours off, a whole weekend even, and you're supposed to only drive 11 hours. And now you're into that situation where you're 2 hours from being at your destination. 13, they'll say, okay, in this one case here, that's okay. You can go up to 14 before it's like you're paying more than you made for making that 14-hour trip. The fine would be. So they're pretty hardcore about that. And most of the time, your transportation companies won't take a load that's 14 hours away unless they put 2 drivers on it. And so one driver can get in the back and take a nap while the other one's taking over. Drivers must take a 34-hour break from driving and other duties. So not just driving, we're talking about anything that has to do with that rig once every 168 hours. In other words, every 7 days, you got to take a weekend off. Your weekend might be Tuesday and Wednesday, but you have to have these consecutive hours. 34 hours is more than 24. So you got a day and a half in there, but they want to try to make it where you have 2 days off before you start on the road driving for 5 days. In addition, drivers cannot drive more than 60 to 70 hours in any time frame of a 7 or 8 consecutive days. And so that would be 10 hours or less if they were driving for 8 days. And they're saying you need that 34-hour break, even though you've been on the road a week. You need that break before, you start getting distracted or you start being involved in less than safe activities. Drivers must keep a daily record of their activities for each 24-hour cycle in a daily logbook. It's electronic. Somebody else is doing that for you. The entries should be kept in the employer's office, which they are. They're coming through automation to a software with your employer and you on your phone or what have you, and will be reviewed for your accuracy and compliance. So even if you got out of one truck and that truck has a timer on it, doesn't matter. The timer follows the driver. If you got out of one truck and got into another one and drove it, your time would still be continued as to how many hours you could operate the vehicle. It's not the truck that they're timing, it's the driver that they're timing. And here's what we were talking about, having our shores protected for just U.S. shippers, mariner traffic. And so if a shipment starts at a U.S. port and it's going to another U.S. port, it has to have owned by a U.S. company, it's controlled by U.S. citizens with at least 75% U.S. ownership. At least 75% of the crew are U.S. citizens, built or rebuilt in the U.S., and it's registered under a U.S. flag. In other words, it's a U.S. ship. And so you can be coming from, they gave an example down here, where you can be coming from the Philippines and you stop and you drop stuff off in Portland, you stop, you drop stuff off in Seattle, you go all the way down to Los Angeles, but you're coming to your last stop and you're loading up your ship to go to Japan. Is that legal? And it's yes, because you are not picking up anything on those stops and going to another port. On the last stop, you have to time those and schedule them, where the last stop is where you take on cargo, because you're not going to another U.S. port, you are going to an overseas destination. So it's pretty simple. If you're going to be moving freight from one U.S. port to the other, picking up and moving, you have to be a U.S. crew-owned ship. If you're an international ship, you can only drop off at the ports that after you leave a distant station and arrive there, You can only pick up on the US port if you're heading back to a distant station. These are all key agencies that help us out when it comes to transportation. Federal Highway Institution or Administration. They administer intermodal programs in cooperation with the states. And so rail and truck, ship and truck, ship and rail, all of those kind of things, when they cross state lines, they have this federal agency that's going to tell where the trailers are, where the rail cars are, and all that stuff that can make that still happen. Federal Railroad Administration, you kind of pick that one up. Oversees federal freight on railroads and safety. Federal Aviation, you can kind of pick that up. It's for civil aviation safety, administers U.S. air traffic control. FAA also has all the licensing for TV and radio stations, anything else through the airwaves. They also are the administration that rules about where you can fly drones. If you didn't know it, 10 foot up above the air falls under FAA, and your neighbor can fly their drone right across your yard 10 foot above the ground, because that's a federal aviation area. Being contested in some areas where it's privacy, people are flying their drones up to a second 4-bedroom window. You can see that that becomes a little bit of a mess. Maritime Administration, they take care of federal waterborne transportation, ships, shipping port operations, vessel, national security, environment, safety, and the merchant marines. This one here was always the one that threw my students, because the Federal Motor Carrier Safety enforces safety for commercial motor vehicles and vehicle safety. It's buses and trucks, anything that's a commercial vehicle. And we went down that list of what that is. It's something that can haul 8 passengers for hire or 15 not for hire. They fall under this one. Pipeline, hazardous material, you guys can figure that one out. National Highway Safety, Traffic Safety. This one administers safety programs, sets and enforces standards for federal safety on fuel economy and crash survivability. Regulates vehicles, equipment, investigates defects in motor vehicles, provides grants to states and local governments for highway safety programs, and conducts research on driver behaviors and traffic safety. So these folks are the ones that do all the studies on figuring out the best way to make an intersection. I think Indiana finally made it to world record, Guinness Book of World Records, for the most roundabouts. And supposedly roundabouts are quicker than lights, and there's less traffic fatalities from coming to intersections when people are trying to beat a yellow light or run a red light. So we're setting the standard on how urban and rural roads should look. And then the Surface Transportation Board, anything above ground, and they really concentrate a lot on how railroads, disputes about any kind of mergers or rates that are involved with the railroad. Okay, a lot of federal agencies. This is the ones that we contend with in transportation. Under Homeland Security, since 9/11, when this became a thing, it wasn't before. All of these different agencies were their own separate governed agency. Now they all fall under one secretary of Homeland Security. We've got Customs and Border Protection. They're, of course, doing the deeds to check freight and people and vehicles coming in and out of the country. Transportation Security comes up with the different ways that they classify containers. They want to inspect them at the point of origin, and they want a video or a picture to find out what's in there as it's being loaded. So then when it gets here, they're not bringing any kind of hazardous material contamination. We don't have to get all security bent over when it comes to this side. The Coast Guard, one of our sister services in the armed forces, at a time of war, they fall under the Department of Navy. Their funding and everything in the peacetime comes under the Department of Transportation. The Navy also has a Marine Corps, but you won't hear the Marines claim that. So the Navy has the Marines. Coast Guard, and of course them. And the Army used to have the Air Force until like 1960, and it became its own branch. And right now, Space Force is kind of a stepchild of the Air Force because the people and the resources and the bases are being moved from the Air Force to Space Force. But the Coast Guard, they are like on duty all the time or peacetime. It's just their bosses change, their mission doesn't. Federal Maritime Commission, these are the folks who run the ports. They tell about what kind of activities can happen there. They're involved in international ocean transport system. They investigate rules and complaints. I mean, if you got robbed and you had your cargo setting in a port, say in the Philippines, and they got robbed, these are the people who would investigate, and they would petition that country to honor treaties, and your insurance would take it through the appropriate levels to make sure that your cargo got found or they paid you for the value of the cargo. National Transportation Safety Board, they investigate all air, rail, maritime, pipeline accidents, determine probable cause. The organization also conducts plenty of research and recommends safety improvements, and it coordinates post-accident victim assistance. So this is the only agency that we looked at that doesn't have some kind of enforcement or policing ability. They are investigators, and then they assist people that were, harmed in some type of a plane crash or, that they need help on. So that kind of wraps up chapter 6. And so we will close out tonight and look at, let's see what other pictures I had pictures up here. Yeah, it's just a flashback. We needed to look at the terms. We needed to look at what was part of the Homeland Security. We need a reminder about what kind of ships can do shipping from one port to another in the US. What's commercial vehicles, hours of operation, and then what are these different FOB codes, that who's responsible for the charges, who owns it, and who files complaints if it, comes up missing. All right, so I'm going to shut off our recording. If I can get that right icon to come up.